I didn't think we'd ever get to the point I'd want to redo a review, but that's exactly what we're doing here today. The Minstrel song video is something that I've wanted to go back to for some time now. It's been a few years since I made the original video, and I'd played the game all the way through several times before the remaster even came out. So now that the remaster is here, it's the perfect excuse to go through everything I've bottled up ever since, which I'm sure you can see by the runtime is a lot. So let's get this New Game Plus version of my Romancing SaGa Minstrel song review started. Romancing SaGa Minstrel Song, like many SaGa games, doesn't have much in the way of an overarching narrative. An ancient evil god by the name of Sauruin is about to awaken, having spent the last 1,000 years sealed away after his defeat by the previous band of heroes. And you pick one of 8 starting characters to go out there and explore the world of Mardias until it's time to put a stop to him, counting down the clock until Sauruin's return. So let's introduce the starting cast and give you a sampling of their special overworld theme music before we really dig into the game itself. We've got Albert, who gets a very long opening story compared to the other characters. He's arguably the most main character of the bunch, considering his direct connection to the larger plot of the game. A lot of people consider him the best starting character because of that, but I don't know if I'd really agree. I think playing him later to get his special armor and one of the non-standard endings is the best way to go about it with him. Barbara, a dancer who gets dumped into the world with a larger number of areas opened up and in possession of one of the Fate Stones from the start. She's also on the wrong side of the new road, and it takes her a little extra work to open up a lot of areas most characters get to more easily. But she's got a wagon that lets her run over monsters, so that's neat. Hawk, an exiled pirate who is set up to do a late-game treasure hunt quest as his only guiding light after his introduction is ended as a prank. His introduction itself has him get betrayed by his own people. He also starts with Galahad in his party, and everyone loves Galahad. Gray, an incredibly all-rounded character that can easily be used in every combat role and excel in pretty much all of them. He starts his quest on a treasure island with 2 extremely strong party members with the option to recruit Claudia as his introduction comes to a close. Claudia, a girl raised by the Witch of Mazewood. She's an excellent bow user who has an absurd BP growth, something that's very important in this game, since it lets you do your big moves much more frequently. Jamil, a thief from the slums of South Estamir. He has a unique companion you can unlock for others in New Game Plus after his playthrough, Dowd. He's kind of like Claudia in that he has some really good BP stats, giving him an oversized starting pool each combat to speed things up. Sif, a muscle woman. For some reason, she's the first pick for most people I've introduced to this game. The secret to Albert's long intro is that you're forced to also play her intro quest as him. She's also the only one who knows how to get to her home country, Shiverland. Aisha, a Terralian nomad girl. She exists, I guess. Don't pick her unless you already know what you're doing because she has a very rough start, with low stats and no relevant combat skills. This is intentional, she gets kidnapped and her entire tribe goes missing. Honestly, you can pick whoever you want and probably have a decent enough experience in the game. Outside of the introduction quest, the rest of the game is largely the same for all of them. Some people think that a longer intro quest gives a better structured feeling for new players not used to how open SaGa is to play, but keep in mind that longer intros also keep you from recruiting party members and can lock you out of the early game quests with easier bosses. Personally, I think the first time playing, it's best to just go in blind and mess around until you feel like you've got a grip on the game and how to approach its systems, and then starting a new game to play it for real, using what you learned to get ahead. Every SaGa game has been different in its structure outside of it playing very much unlike most other RPGs, and Minstrel Song is no exception on that front. Originally a remake of a broken Super Famicom game that didn't even have its core quest, the Fate Stones, properly implemented in its entirety, Minstrel Song ends up blending a lot of concepts from later entries as a sort of conclusive package, bringing in all the highlights of the series up to that point into one beast of a game. Meaning tons of content, tons of replayability, and systems upon systems upon systems. If you've ever heard that SaGa games have a reputation of being incredibly unfinished, that's mainly because the main entry that got kinda popular outside of Japan was SaGa Frontier on the PlayStation 1, which, yeah, that game is bare bones in terms of main and side content. Especially when put next to other SaGa entries before and after its initial release. This isn't the case for Minstrel Song, it's a beast of a game, and there's been some minor changes here and there with this version, since we're now playing a remaster of a remake of the first non-handheld SaGa game. Love how these things play out. The structure of how the game plays is still largely taken from the original Super Nintendo game. You choose a starting character and go through their introductory quest. Once that is finished, you travel around putting together a team of 5 party members. They're usually hanging out in taverns in each town, though who appears is decided by a dice roll upon entering, with a set number of locations they could actually appear in. Once you have your party put together, you go out and do quests, or fight random enemies to pass the time. It's up to you, really. The only quests you really need to do are your character's introduction quest and the fight against the final boss. Everything between those points is optional. When I first made a video about this game, one of my key points was how much I was impressed by the freedom it gave you. You can recruit anyone you want into your party, give them any weapon or magic type, and starting stats and character growth for giving can make all of it work. You can come across quests and decide whether or not you actually want to do them. It is very freeing compared to the linear narratives that most typical RPGs railroad you on. But there's still a structure here, one that's especially noticeable once you're more familiar with the game. And learning the intricacies and nuances of them made me truly appreciate it on a much deeper level years later after my video. Fighting against enemy encounters slowly but surely increases your event rank, and event rank decides what quests are available and for how long. It also increases the strength of enemies. Some people panic about this because it means you can't grind to overpower monsters, but if anything, the monsters are scaling to meet your increasing strength. And as monsters get stronger, you get stronger from fighting them, creating a neat little cycle. However, the quests are set in stone in terms of how strong the bosses are at the end of them. Not everything grows in power alongside you, so random encounters might be fluid and change with you, but fights directly related to the quests are static. They'll always be as strong or weak as they are. So there is still a reason to get stronger, and to consider how you want to build your party to keep up with the increasing demand from the static encounters. There's a number of quests that become unavailable, or that have lesser outcomes if you don't do them in time. So, if you want to play the game especially well and do those quests, you have to be mindful of how many encounters you fight. As with the rest of the series, regular enemies appear on the overworld, with different character models representing different encounter groups. Each of these has their own movement pattern, and you can learn these to help avoid unnecessary combat. Plants lunge at you in a straight line, birds and beasts tend to have difficulty turning around, slimes slowly creep at you, zombies shrink into the ground, lurking out of sight, lizards are a pain. Those flying demon things teleport in front of you, and there's an audio cue that plays right before they warp, and you can abuse that by turning around right as the sound plays so they're still behind you. It kind of makes running across maps feel like you're playing a game like Dead Rising at times, skillfully dodging groups of monsters by zigzagging through them, abusing their predictable motions to get past them without using up precious resources. Not to mention how you're on the clock trying to make your way to your quest objective, often a boss fight, at the end of the road. Now, depending on the mode you're playing the game in, the clock in this game can be fairly lenient. People tend to make a bigger deal out of needing to avoid all combat than is necessary. What is mostly important is just not fighting every enemy that you see and mindlessly grinding nonstop. The remaster added an option to select between 2 progress speeds at the start, one that is familiar to people who have played the original in the West, and one that is familiar to Japanese players. Apparently they actually made the event rank counter a lot more lenient in the Western version back in the day. Usually games were made a lot harder outside of Japan to combat rentals, even during the PlayStation 2 days. Devil May Cry 3 an especially infamous example, bumping up all the difficulty settings by 1. So it's very odd to learn about this. I've played both the slower Western progression and the faster Japanese one while working on this video, both are manageable enough. I even found the time to do an ecology quest before the clock ran out on that faster timing without skipping any of the quests. This was by accident, by the way. It defaults the speed to the Japanese normal, and I forgot to turn it down to slow for that playthrough. I'd intended to play on fast the playthrough after that one for comparison, but oh well. I spent some time freaking out, wondering why I was having a hard time keeping up at some points until I realized what was going on. If you're new to the game, I'd recommend sticking with the way that it was for us in the West and keep that slower progression going. It gives you much more room to breathe.
You know, I gotta tell you, I'd rather be sailing.
One interesting note about event rank is that the remaster added a clock to the menu. This wasn't there originally. You might think that this addition would be divisive or change a lot of how the game is played, since the information is much more in your face now rather than being a hidden system, but not really. In the original, you could tell what event rank you were at by talking to the Volunteer Brigade kids and counting how many tutorial texts had been unlocked, since those unlock based on your event rank. So there was always a way to check on your rank, but now it's just much more intuitive. If you play conservatively and do all the quests using a guide, which is not a playstyle I'd push people towards the first time around, but whatever floats your boat, you're likely going to run out of things to do around the time the late game starts, and that's fine. It also gives you more time to come to grips with how the game works, which you're going to need because, oh boy, there's systems upon systems upon systems in this game. And a lot of them matter. Like, you'd never think about something like this existing in a video game, but there's a whole ecology system in this game's areas. The more you fight one monster type, the weaker their grouping becomes. This doesn't mean that their encounters get easier, it means that their population is thinning, which in turn means that their natural predators appear less, since they have less prey to sustain themselves on. But also the creatures who used to be food for their monster type that you just killed will become more dominant, since their predator has been taken out of the picture. Which, of course, has an effect on the monster type they eat. I know I sound like I made a bunch of strange bullshit up, but there are multiple optional ecology quests where one elemental god or another wants you to help their preferred species thrive, and this system is how you get those to the top. It's genuinely crazy stuff, but that's the kind of stuff that this game is all about. So, we've talked around it long enough already, let's get to the real action. Let's talk combat.
Are you ready?
Combat in Minstrel Song is a joy. What starts off as a fairly traditional and straightforward RPG combat system just keeps expanding with more and more systems on top of each other. And I'm not kidding about the expansion part. It isn't just that you spark more moves over time, giving you more ways to deal damage each turn like in most SaGa games. Minstrel Song has a tendency to give you these big tutorial pop-ups during fights over time. They're fully voiced, like the rest of the game's text is.
This is known as a glimmer.
These are the moments that the game is actually unlocking this mechanic. It's holding back on them so as not to overwhelm new players. Which is probably a good thing, because there are a lot of mechanics at play here. So, normally combat, you start with a party of 5 characters. You select everyone's moves, and then the turn plays out with everyone attacking one by one, with the order they go in largely being based on attack speed. There actually is an optional system that lets you pick turn order for everyone, which causes everyone to wait their turn but still takes attack speed into consideration for when the enemy moves. There are fights in the game where this is actually very useful, believe it or not. But normally, you use the system where turn order is decided by character speed. Like the other entries, you start off each combat encounter fresh. Full HP, no status effects. If a character goes down, they lose 1 life point. Any healing item or spell also counts as a revive. Though, even if they're downed, they'll be on their feet again when the next fight starts so long as they still have life points. If they're out of life points, they're out of the party. Though the game gives you so much LP to work with, this should never really become a problem at any point.
Regrets. I've had a few.
When selecting moves, there's two costs for them in the menu, BP and DP. BP are battle points, basically your typical mana system. Every character has a different amount that they can start fights with, a different maximum amount they can have during a fight, and a different amount they gain every turn. These numbers grow over time, allowing you to do bigger moves more frequently the further your party grows. And of course, every party member has a different starting, max, and gain value they start with, and a different rate at which they're likely to grow. DP is your weapon's durability. Abilities can use weapon durability to use. Red numbers means it will always use this amount, while green numbers means that it costs 1 durability point or could potentially cost nothing. There are ways to change these numbers, but we'll get to that later. So you have a basic system where you have to consider two different costs in battle for your abilities. BP is short-term, only mattering for that particular encounter. DP long-term, relevant until you fix up your weapons in town. I usually carry more than one weapon per character. A secondary weapon I use in case I need to burn durability on certain abilities to get past simple enemies faster while still keeping the stronger weapon in good shape for potential boss fights or especially difficult encounters.
The best thieves stay out of trouble. Then there's me.
Weapon variety is in a very good spot in this game. You've got knives, swords, spears, axes, staves, bows, martial arts, and more, since there are distinctions between one- and two-handed weapon types. So axes are split between hand axes and two-handed axes. This is important for the class system, which doesn't always include proficiencies for both variants for each class. Personally, I'm a big fan of bows, spears, and foils, though my last two playthroughs made me a big believer in picking up a club and going unga bunga on enemies. As always, your characters can spark new techniques over time, replacing their originally assigned order for their newly learned move, but without the normal BP and DP costs associated with them. So you don't accidentally end up breaking your weapon or using BP while trying to save up for that big attack. There's a lot of techniques this time around, and unlike most previous SaGa games I've covered, there is no limit to how many abilities you can have equipped on your party. So as your party grows in power, so does your list of options to use during a fight. And surprisingly, a large portion of abilities have a real use, rather than just spamming one tried and true move against everything all game long. Attacks are grouped together in three different categories: attack, trick, and defense. These are all modifiers to your character's stats in a way. They kind of just help to do what the name suggests. Attack style focuses on damage, trick on speed, and defense helps mitigate incoming damage. You can also modify your weapons to prefer certain modes, so they'll be listed at the top and give a bigger boost to that attack style. It doesn't make the biggest difference in the world, but every little bit can help you survive some of the tougher fights. So outside of some edge cases, I usually set everyone to defense mode to help turn down the damage taken, especially since it could help deflect attacks, meaning some enemies are going to waste their entire turn if deflected. Supposedly the system driving this is like a rock paper scissors one, but the majority of the enemies are set to attack, which a defensive style is strong against anyway.
Let's get this party started.
This is all stuff you don't really see on the surface though. SaGa games love their invisible systems and counters it will never explain. The three different groupings aren't the only big difference between moves. With the different costs split between both durability and battle points, the best move choices are often very situational. Not only that, but a lot of the different attacks can also have different utility, lowering stats on the enemy, potentially stunning them, AoEs, multi-hit attacks. These are all things you have to consider between available moves, what enemies you're facing, and the shape of both your party's battle point income and the state of their weapons.
Yep, that about does it.
But it gets even more complex when you consider how these moves play with those of the rest of the party members and their ability to combo together. You have party positions. SaGa games love to stress their formations. So rather than being there like an afterthought the way it is in a lot of RPGs, it does help to look at what position benefits each party member. Spears do much better in the middle row than they do in the front or back, Spellcasters and bow users are much better left in the back row. These positions don't just have an effect on how much damage the user in this row takes, but how much damage they do and how fast they can act with this distance too. And then that plays into combos as well. SaGa Frontier's combo system makes a return, though there's much more going on with it this time. As more of the party joins together with their attacks, you get a higher bonus damage percentage. So far so good. But then there's also vortexes tied to the system. Vortexes are special modifiers that can happen as part of a combo. Which ones happen depends on how many people do a move that could lead into one, and from what position and in what order. Combos are interesting because there's a lot of background checks in place with what moves can combo into one another and how likely they'll do it. You could attempt to memorize all of that, but usually during a playthrough you'll notice certain characters end up doing combos together with certain moves after a while. And from there, you can replicate it, trying to bust out one of these moves together to a good effect. Vortexes require certain combos with certain amount of characters, often with some extra thought towards what row they're on. And I'm sure planning a party around that is as complicated as it sounds, but I usually stumble my way into the scissors, the pillars, and a few others. And from there I try to remember what skills allowed for this to happen so I can get it to happen again. Benedictions are a much rarer occurrence. They're the literal gods of the game's world coming to your aid if your favor with them is high enough. I typically only have 1 or 2 happen in a playthrough at a time. They're that uncommon, typically speaking anyway. You can even increase your favor with the evil god Sauruine high enough for him to come help you out during the fights. I keep doing this and I have no idea why.
This is known as a benediction.
A lot of the special attacks in the game have a chance to trigger a surge. Surges make your moves come out faster and makes them impossible to dodge. Moves can also reverse, making your attack hit twice in a row, kind of the equivalent of a critical hit. I like that these kinds of effects often alter the names of the attacks, sometimes even extending the animations. It's a nice touch. Attacks can also surge reverse, giving both of these effects at the same time.
This ultimate secret is known as the Surge Reverse.
There's also fulcrums, allowing special effects from moves to work together if they are the combo starter. Some moves and spells can actually cost life points instead of battle points, so that's something you should always look out for. Oh, and if all of that wasn't enough, there's also chain combat. Remember how I said you want to dodge needless combat by finding your way around enemies, abusing their movement patterns? Well, after a while, the combat encounters start chaining into one another if the overworld monsters are bunched up together. So you have to fight all of these encounters in a row with your party's health, status effects, and BP kept intact between them, in a game where combat is generally balanced around starting them at full power, so individual fights can take down party members quite easily if you're not careful. And if combat is chained, you can't run from it. But chains are good actually, since it has a positive effect on the gains after the encounter is done. So if you're after a certain type of ore hated by the original PlayStation 2 players, abusing that goes a long way to make item farming much more manageable. Also, just a quick note, I'm sure people familiar with the original game would like to know, but they fixed the Moloch drop rates, by the way. I haven't done a full playthrough as Grey yet in this remaster, but I did have Moloch drop from zombie dragons multiple times, as well as it appearing when mining for ore quite frequently. So his weapon quest is now a lot more manageable.
Oh, isn't this convenient?
You don't have to spend several days trying to force a drop from a chained encounter against multiple packs of zombie dragons in Estamir sewers in the hopes of getting one single ore drop anymore. I did this in the PlayStation 2 game. Why is my luck like this? Status effects are also kind of crazy with how nuanced they can get in this game. Like, there's a difference between getting charmed or confused. Being charmed means your character always hits an ally with a random ability. If they're confused, they can still hit an enemy with one instead. Being stunned means you don't get to act for the rest of the turn. Being knocked out lasts several turns. there's a lot of small nuances like these that matter, and alongside all the options for your own attacks, it makes for a very nuanced, satisfying, but still quite fast-paced battle system.
You'll play your best game against your greatest foe. Me.
Both in the original, but especially in the remaster, now that you can double the combat speed. I was shocked at how much faster you can make it through the game now, simply because fights go by at a quicker pace. And I may have ruined the original speed for myself, because when I switch back to it, it's looking like the game is running in slow motion. I had to double check some of my old PS2 footage to make sure the normal speed was actually correct. As a European, it really reminds me of like PAL versus NTSC conversions. The gap is that big. You can speed up movement on the overworld too, though this is something I have more mixed feelings about. Switching back and forth between standard speed when enemies are around and higher speeds when you make your way through open spaces is probably the best way to go about it. At least, that's how I feel about this. It is definitely doable to dodge enemies at twice the normal speed, but it's not easy or recommended unless you're already deeply familiar with the movement patterns. Though if you somehow find yourself in a combat encounter you'd rather not be part of, you could always run away. Like in most other SaGa games, fleeing from combat has a 100% success rate, at least during the fights you're allowed to get an early exit. Running away costs 1 life point from the party member initiating the action. In return, it doesn't increase event rank. You'd think being a coward and running away a lot is a vile thing to do, but it's an important part of managing your event rank if you're trying to do everything. The remaster even further enables you by giving you a bunch of smoke bombs, an item that lets you run away from battle without taking a life point. You get a set of 10 of them every time you rest at an inn and pay for one of the more expensive rooms, which makes inns a lot more relevant again too, since you can now save your game everywhere. In the PlayStation 2 release, you could only save normally at inns, and you had quick saves for when you're out and about. But now we have quick saving, auto saving, and regular saving, so the remaster has created a very clever system to force players to rotate their save files, even if they're not actively trying to. Now you might think that running away makes the game way too easy, being allowed to just ditch combat without any negative repercussions, but that's not entirely the case either. You can't run away from chained combat encounters, so if you spend time running circles around a group trying not to get into a pointless fight while getting to the end of a cave, and one of the monsters catches up to you, they end up dragging several others into the fight with them, so yeah, you're stuck fighting all of these encounters in a row now.
And I was just getting started.
You could also bite the bullet and draw one enemy out, start the fight with them, and take the coward's way out to despawn them. Because of this, life points are a resource that has to be used like any other. And this is why the early game on a first playthrough locks away chains. Putting that stress on evasion too early would make the game very frustrating and difficult for new players. It takes some time before the game unlocks this system, while in New Game Plus, every system you've unlocked is available from the start, including chains, which can speed up the early game event rank too fast if you're not careful. Event rank is the lifeblood of Minstrel Song. Once that big clock hits 20, you can do your endgame quest, marking the endpoint of the playthrough. As much as this makes it sound like it's a short metagame, this is not SaGa Frontier where you'll hit the endgame in 6 quests or less. Minstrel Song is a full-fledged RPG campaign in length, even with the doubled combat speed turned on. Alania's guide on GameFAQs, one of the best guides I've ever had the pleasure to use for any video game, puts the total amount of quests in this game at 57. 5 of those are character-specific, 3 of those are potential endgame quests that you can only do once per playthrough, under normal circumstances, and 2 are kind of special quests requiring for more than 1 playthrough to do. You don't have to do all of these quests. In fact, if you're playing the game for the first time, you'll probably have a better time just exploring around, stumbling your way into quests, and then maybe looking into how you're supposed to deal with them if you're really struggling to figure it out. Doing everything doesn't really matter unless you're enough of a gamer for New Game Plus, which works with its own set of rules. When it comes down to it, all you really have to do are the opening quest and the final one. There are a bunch of quests that end early, mostly in the early game, but doing everything requires a level of planning and familiarity that might not be all that fun the first time around. To bring back the comparison, think of it like Dead Rising. You're not going to do all the quests and save all the people the first time you play the game. You're going to explore them all and do weird shit. And on replays, you're gonna try and save everyone and do all the quests. It's a lot like that here. Though I would recommend maybe checking out what's going on at the Malvare police station, as well as reading the notice in the pub upstairs before Event Rank 4, since that sequence should give you a decent feeling for how the game is normally played. That questline isn't too hard to figure out on your own either. There's a sequence of kidnappings going on.
So you took her!
Hey, chill out. I came because I saw your notice at the pub.
Sorry, I'm just worried sick about my daughter.
A shopkeeper was found dead, and an innkeeper's daughter has gone missing, and it's up to you to put a stop to whatever it is that's going on. It's a good example of a quest structure in Minstrel Song. You usually get info about the quest in town either from the local pub or from an NPC. You might even get it from both. Talking to other NPCs related to the event gives you vital clues, and then you're off into the dungeon, or in this case, the sewers, to put a stop to whatever evil started this. And afterwards you talk to people involved and claim your rewards, usually money and jewels. This isn't the format for every quest, but it is for a lot of them. Quests are important to do because they're your main source of income. Enemies don't drop all that much money or jewels on their own. Most of the especially good equipment in the game is store-bought, so money matters. Some of the better weapons are found in chests or are given away as quest rewards, but you don't necessarily need the best in-slot weapons to do well in the game. Second or third best is often more than enough to get ahead, so you can usually buy a decent weapon if none of the better ones are coming your way. The real important gear to buy though is armor. The best in-slot gear is all store-bought. Though on your first playthrough there is another issue here as well, as you won't have enough clout to convince the store owners to sell you their goods. To increase your clout, you need to have some good shopping experience under your belt. Both buying and selling items increases your store clout across the 3 categories. And yes, this is a real system. One nice way to boost this is getting the dinosaur egg early on and selling that for a decent amount of early game gold. The townsfolk in Jelton will talk about there being a shallow hole near the town, and there is a trick with getting the egg without too much trouble. Especially now in the remaster, initiating combat with a dinosaur and running away before you grab the egg despawns them. They won't despawn if you grab the egg first. The dinosaur egg isn't the only treasure in the game. Most dungeons and areas you do quests in have side areas you can find some treasure in, though some of them might be a little hard to get to and require a skill check. There's a whole system in the game where you use field skills to get past certain obstacles, basically trying to evoke a tabletop dice roll to get to them, like climbing and jumping falling under the survival skill check, and search allowing you to find hidden ore or treasure chests. Treasure chests can be locked or booby-trapped, so you need the right skills equipped and enough points to their proficiencies to deal with this too. Besides this, there's the treasure maps. Treasure maps are items that drop from enemies. These tell you that there's a treasure in the area in its item description. You dig these up by equipping the Find Treasure proficiency along with the Excavate proficiency. These can give some especially strong equipment, as well as a ton of gold.
Well.
Anyway, once you're done being a treasure hunter and your clout with the shopkeepers is big enough, you want to look out for the field plate, the fashionable helm, the leg mail, and the conqueror gloves. For extra effect, take them to a blacksmith and put some Goral on them. There's store-bought Goral armor too. That's the same armor for way more money, so just buy the standard versions and put Goral on it yourself. Like I mentioned, the best in slot armor is all store-bought, and since you can freely travel across the world going to each town whenever you please, there is no increasingly powerful armor in stores along the way. Clout is the lockout system to stop you from getting everything too early, but that doesn't take too much to bypass. So there's never any need to bother buying low-level gear. You want to save up and get the best stuff you can. There's a similar situation with jewels, the other big quest reward. Jewels are how you level up the classes of your party members. Every town has its own skill trainer. Each of these has its own set of classes that they can train your party in. The best course of action is to level characters as a class that has their weapon type as part of their skill set. It doesn't necessarily have to be the one they started out as. Since you mainly get jewels from quests, and quests aren't infinite, you want to spend them well. Especially if it's your first time playing, since leveling up weapon proficiencies also has a major effect on how much BP abilities cost to use in combat. Once you've raised a single class to a high enough level, you can raise individual proficiencies too, not just for the ones in that class, but all of them at each trainer. I think this was done so new players don't just put all their jewels into irrelevant loose skills thinking that the more they have the better, instead guiding them to mostly just raise the classes that their character started out as, since those are typically safe ones to develop, unless you're playing as Aisha, of course. Each recruitable character usually starts out with 2 weapons of different types equipped. These are weapon types that these characters are innately good at, though you don't necessarily have to keep them tied to those. Also, when it comes to weapons, you might want to take those to the blacksmith too, not just to set them to the defensive style, but you might want to mess with tempering. The game doesn't explain it too well, but the tempering system is pretty straightforward. Every town's blacksmith has a set of ores that they can use. Some even let you use your own ore that you've mined or found from an encounter. But the type of ore that you want to temper into your weapon are the ones that are harmonious with your weapon. You'll know because the ore's name will turn red when selected. After using a weapon a bunch that has been tempered with a harmonious material, it'll get a +1 behind its name. That's when it's time to figure out what the next ore is to get it to the +2. It's a simple system, but it can be helpful to squeeze that little bit of extra power out of your weapons. Tempering also has an immediate effect on how much DP abilities cost before your class deducts points, so there's an extra incentive to get started with that. Once you've played the game enough times, it becomes easy to decide for yourself how you want to grow your characters, make them fit certain roles within the party, which is great because there are fun little challenges you can do putting together certain parties, like grouping together the Estamir trio, a combination of characters you weren't intended to get together at the same time, but are able to thanks to a small oversight, and then building a party around that. The Estamir trio is a fun one because Daud is originally a starting character for Jamil, and you can only recruit him as the other characters if you kicked him out of the party early on during your playthrough as him. Jamil cannot recruit Farah, probably because she laughed at him during his attempt at rescuing her.
Love the dress! Can I borrow it?
If you play as other characters, you can get Farah in your party after a certain mid-game quest, but recruiting Jamil or Daud makes the other disappear from the locations that you could normally find them in. But there is a way to get all 3. And I'm not going to tell you how to do this, it's just one of those fun mysteries that makes Minstrel Song fun. It's something I'd actually never done before, getting these 3 kids together in one party, but I thought it'd be fun to do for this video. What I will get into though is how New Game Plus works, as well as my biggest issue with this remaster. It's kind of a minor issue, all things considered. If you know what the problem is, you can fix it without much thought, or don't if you don't want to and don't think it's a problem. Romancing SaGa Minstrel Song is built with New Game Plus in mind. The final boss is not at full power until your second playthrough, and at that point you can power him up even further if you really want to challenge yourself. Plenty of quests and bosses aren't available until you're on a replay after already having finished the game, and there's a reason for that. In the PlayStation 2 original, there are no options for New Game Plus, so a certain number of things were carried over to your next playthrough, and that's where the remaster decides to get messy. You actually get a list of options now, with tons of extra game-breaking choices to get to the end faster, which is fine, everything's optional, I'm okay with that. The issue is, it turns a lot of game-breaking options on by default, and it gives no indication what the game was originally built around. So taking with you your gold, jewels, skill levels, techniques, proficiencies, and spells are all turned on by default, when these are not things you should be taking with you. The issue with taking a lot of these sorts of options into the next playthrough should be obvious, especially if you played the original release. A lot of them are going to push you to keep the same party members over and over again, since they have all the cool abilities and they have all the proficiencies in the weapons you've already got with you. It is very likely to keep a player pigeonholed in just using the same stuff each time, when the ability to drastically change parties and build new ones each time was part of the charm of the original release. That doesn't mean the original didn't take anything into the next adventure though. Jewel payouts for quests would increase each playthrough, letting you invest more into your party's abilities faster. It would also let you expand their kit, since they'd have more jewels to spare for spells on the side. Shop levels would stay at the level you got them to, allowing you to get better gear faster. Maps would stay unlocked so you don't have to find them in areas anymore. And most importantly, the tutorial flags would stay locked, which sounds minor, but it means combos, surges, and chains are active immediately. So if you're not careful with enemy movement on maps, you could get chained into a higher event rank very fast from the start. Basically, the original options didn't make the game that much easier, but they did cut some of the fluff to get you to the fun faster, which is great because the Fatestone quest matters a lot more now. Any Fatestones you didn't get along the way could potentially be donated to the final boss to power him up further. And I wouldn't have an issue with the newer options if they weren't turned on by default. Sure, you can turn them off yourself, but players unfamiliar with the original game might not even realize that what they're assuming is the standard the game was built around actually isn't that at all. Either giving players info on whether or not certain settings are recommended or balanced around, or just setting the default choices to how it used to work, would save a lot of headaches.
I'll need some treasure after that one.
I know this might sound minor to people who have only played this version or haven't played the game at all, but the New Game Plus structure is where a lot of my love for this game stems from. Since now you have that faster jewel income compared to before and hopefully a better understanding of the game's systems this second time around, you're also expected to perform better. This is both demonstrated by the final boss being stronger in New Game Plus, but also some of the newer bosses you have access to. Remember those ecology quests that I mentioned earlier? Well, you can fill those, but only after you've already successfully done one in a previous playthrough. If you've done an ecology quest already and start the same one in a playthrough after, but wait too long before finish it, the elemental lord in charge of the area gets corrupted, making you fight a stronger version of it.
We can't win!
I'd actually never fought one of these until playing for this video, just like I'd never snuck into the Netherworld or fought death before, but I did, just for the sake of content. Keep in mind, I've played through the game 3 times before with the PlayStation 2 version, 4 if you count the abandoned Hawk playthrough, where I stopped at Sourween, unable to beat him, before trying again and beating the game as Gray, Albert, and Claudia in that order. If anyone wonders, I'm at 6 playthroughs total counting both versions, all with a different character. 7 if we count the aforementioned abandoned Hawk playthrough, though that's a duplicate character at this point. Another big change is how quickly you can do the Unlucky Woman quest, which I'm also kind of split on. It's nice being able to get the Fatestone from it in your first or second playthrough now.
A sadness washes over me whenever I see you. I'm reminded of a gifted general on Ligao Isle. He coveted powerful weapons to protect his country.
This quest would originally only progress one step every New Game Plus that you did, but now you can just do it in one playthrough or 2. It's nice to be able to get the Fatestone from it in your first or second playthrough now, but at the same time, the amount of preparation required to fight the boss at the end of this quest, maybe it was locked behind more playthroughs for a reason. Though it is nice more people can see that boss design now. It's one of those fights that not everyone was going to see under normal circumstances. The complaints I have don't mean that I hate this remaster. If anything, I find these changes odd, specifically because everything else was handled with such great care not to break the flow or look of the original game.
But we can swim the rest of the way.
You can't be serious.
Okay, dive right in. Go!
Like, one minor detail I caught was the font change. Normally when ports of old games come to modern systems, you get these overly sterile and clean font choices. It doesn't bother me that much, I can kinda look past it myself. But Square especially doesn't have the best track record with these things though. But Minstrel Song's Remaster has a different font than the original PlayStation 2 version. It's still very much in the same spirit, but a lot more readable. Going back to the original release, the font there looks too cramped and bold for my taste, so hey, it's a good upgrade. Same with the battle UI. Minstrel Song always conveyed a lot of information on the screen during battles. It actually conveys even more info at a glance now, while using a smaller ratio of the screen space. Largely because the game is now in widescreen, but the new information is very welcome. It's clear that there was a lot of consideration put here, and it panned out quite well. Same with the game's own visuals. That watercolor look really comes to life in HD. Granted, I've mostly played the PlayStation 2 version upscaled, so I've been a firm believer in this game's style translating to modern screens especially well. Visually speaking, my favorite moment in this game is when you get this especially nice transition between a painted cutscene into the 3D character models of the game. It's the introduction to when you fight Scorn in front of the Twin Moon Temple, hidden deep in the jungle of Wallen Isle. It looks great.
I am most grateful to you for gathering the medallions for Saruwe.
Nice trick. Now, who are you?
I am Scorn, a minion of Saruwe. Now, hand over the medallions.
To a minion of Saruwe? Over my dead body!
Make no mistake, they will be mine!
But it's nice seeing a remaster where no issues are happening because of retexturing or changing the color tone or, making a classic game widescreen. A lot of the camera use does a good job of not making everything feel too boxed in or show out of bounds areas. And man, those oversized bosses, they look so good with the larger resolution. I'm a big fan of the ghost ship boss in particular. The way the color is used on these designs is so good. You know what's also great? Galahad.
I am a Gekling of Wallen Isle. My name is Galahad.
I'm Jamil. Pleased to meet you. Nice to meet you. Why don't you join me?
Many of my brethren hate you hot bloods, but not me. Please, show me your good side and take me with you.
Love that little lizard guy. No, but seriously, well, everyone can randomly spawn in several pubs, making it hard to make sure if they're available or not. Galahad is always in North Point. And he starts out with a pretty good spear, which is a fun weapon type to use. Because of his class, he'll take a bullet for you. If you ever need to kick someone out to make space for a temporary addition, let's say because you want access to their treasure map without paying for it before kicking them out and keeping the map, Galahad is always easy to find back in his original location, the pub in North Point. He might not be the strongest party member of all time, but he will always be in my heart. Another thing I really like is how Gray is always the main character, at least in his own mind. If you recruit him playing as any of the other characters, the game makes it sound like you're joining him, not the other way around.
You can call me Captain Hawk.
So, do you think you've got what it takes to join me? You're confident. Good. I think we can work together.
Normally if you kick out party members, they always get very sad about it, looking down to the floor as they get rejected. Not Gray. He doesn't give a fuck. You're not kicking him out. He's leaving. It's great. Removing party members is handled in an interesting way too. You have to remove them by talking to the minstrel in each pub, who phrases the option to remove party members in an interesting way.
Do you want to dismiss someone from your group? I can do the job if you prefer not to say it yourself.
Also, Dowd. Are you okay, buddy? Do you need help? SaGa games in general have a pretty good sense of humor that is often very underappreciated.
Oh, Warrior of Nisa!
Now, this is not Scarlet Grace with entire comedic quest lines or anything, but the game does have its moments.
Hello. Who sent you? I hate liars. When people lie to me, this is what I do to them. Just kidding. But don't do that again.
Mommy!
Mom!
You found one! Let me have it, or we'll be as rich as royalty! Oh! Ah!
Oh, Mom.
Why did you? My work here is done.
I like how these moments are just peppered through the game. It's not just constantly trying to be funny or offbeat or anything. It just has these moments at times.
The ruins to the east of us were a haven for vampires, eh?
Oh, the ruins just past Yasi. Yeah, once vampires move in, it's tough getting them out.
Mm-hmm. I heard they had vampires back in the old kingdom of Estamir. Had quite a hard time of it too, but that's just an old wives' tale.
This is something that SaGa has always been good at, having these moments that stand out. Like, there's a few ways an early South Estamir kidnapping quest can go. It's a quest where young girls are going missing, and a little investigation has you find out where they're being taken. If you're playing as a male character, you have to fight your way past the guard. But if you're playing as a female character, the guard just lets you walk in, thinking you're offering yourself up freely. Then there's Jamil, who decides to cross-dress to sneak in and bust out the girls because a friend of his got caught up in this situation. Believe it or not, this quest is actually connected to a larger quest later into the game, and one of your options there ties into the potential resolutions and rewards you'll get then. A lot of the storytelling about the setting is very fragmented, but piecing them together gives a clearer picture of the setting at large. And that's where the satisfying part of the story is at. Might sound lame for some, especially JRPG fans where most people are used to big cinematic-style, dramatic, character-focused narratives, which is a fair expectation in most cases. But here it's more about piecing together the larger thread behind the various quests happening, which I think people might be more ready for these days, since so many people love that Soulsborne lore. One great example is Melvir, where somehow things always trace back to their sewers, like the Missing Persons quest, or my favorite small twist, when you think you've caught thieves stealing gold from a nobleman's house red-handed, but it turns out they were trying to plant this gold in his house to frame him, since it's the gold that was stolen during an earlier raid of the depository one town over.
Such a paltry sum makes little difference. By the by, I'm Patrick, Imperial Treasurer, and you are?
Well, I'm nobody special.
Oh, is that so? Bully for you.
So, the noble gets placed under house arrest because, although they don't think it's likely he did it, an example must be made. You can also sell that gold and nobody ever has to find out what happened. But if you do properly finish that quest, you can recruit the guy they were trying to frame, Patrick. He's a great spellcaster, actually. Much better than Flamar, who they made recruitable in this remaster. I kind of ruined my party by switching over to her. She sucks. Anyway, whatever is going on, someone is clearly trying to cause trouble in Melvir sewers. They somehow even have sewer pirates? Pretty much every continent has some sort of political issue going on in the background that isn't immediately apparent until you start piecing together the stories of multiple quests. It's great. On top of that, there's also the lore of how Sauruine, the ancient evil of the setting, already fought and lost an epic battle against a group of heroes 1,000 years ago, with a lot of scenarios where they were surely lucky not to have to fight against these all-powerful foes, pushing you towards the challenge of doing better than the ancient heroes did. There is actually nothing bad about just having the same journey as Mirza did 1,000 years ago. People are thankful for his help to this very day. But what if you did better than him, and instead of fighting a weakened Sauruine, you powered him up yourself by giving him all the Fate Stones that you have collected, so he'll have no excuse when he gets taken down this time around? What if you actually vanquished those corrupted Elemental Lords, or the Jewel Beast, or went straight to hell to kill Death himself? You don't have to. Mirza, the hero of old, didn't do this, and everyone loves him. But you could. It's handled quite well. A lot of the games don't know how to inject their super bosses into the game without a valid reason, either just randomly having stronger bosses in the game without any real purpose, or just continuing the game with weird fantasy dream fights. I think both are okay ways to go about it, giving die-hard fans an extra reason to dig a little deeper after most of the audience has likely already checked out. But having this narrative beat where the ancient hero did their absolute best, did nothing wrong, but luckily avoided the worst hardships is such a strong way to present optional harder challenges, while simultaneously explaining why these exist in a way where you don't have to fight them normally. I adore this. One final thing I want to mention before we close this video out is how good the music is in the entire game. The bar is pretty high with SaGa games in general, but Kenji Ito went above and beyond when he made this soundtrack. Like, sure, he'd already laid the groundwork with the original Super Famicom version, but Minstrel Song's soundtrack goes the extra mile. All the various iterations of the town themes, slightly different in each area, the different overworld themes for each main character, all the different special battle themes, many of which you'll probably never hear in a normal playthrough. It's all exceptionally good. Even the standard battle theme feels special in this game, and I can safely say that after 6 playthroughs, I never got tired of hearing it, and I still listen to it every now and again outside of the game. My favorite songs in the game are the final boss theme and the song I'll play the video out on, Passionate Rhythm. Yeah, I named this video after that song too. It's that good. If you end up liking Passionate Rhythm, there's a live version floating around on YouTube. I'll post a link in the description. It's incredible. So, do I recommend Romancing Saga Minstrel Song or its remaster? Yes to both of these. Minstrel Song ended up becoming a special game for me. The moment I went back to replay it several times over back to back a few years ago, it changed my perspective on RPGs and how they could function quite dramatically. I haven't looked at the genre the same way ever since. I normally don't make a habit of replaying JRPGs, and definitely don't replay them back to back the way I've done this game, both back then and now for this review. And even now, having played the game 3 times in a row for this video, I still want to give it one more shot and go back to it. Maybe actually kill Shirok this time, I don't know. The remaster does a good job of keeping everything the way it should be, but with some nice bonuses. I don't like how it presents the New Game Plus options, but that's my biggest issue, one that's quite easily adjusted back to how it should have been in my opinion. They even kept my favorite JRPG attack name. I was sure they'd change it, but no. The canon of degeneracy is still here. Anyway, this video took a while. Minstrel Song is a special place for me, and I wanted to give it the time and attention it deserves, something I feel my old video did not do. So if you made it this far, maybe give it a like and subscribe. There's no poll this time. I couldn't think of a polite or clever way to call my audience degenerates to tie into the canon of degeneracy line, and I wasn't going to scrap that line. As always, this video was brought to you by the people supporting the channel either through Patreon or a channel membership. If you'd like to support these videos and become one of the names that you see scrolling on the screen right now, head over to patreon.com/AboveUp or join on YouTube, and I will see ya.